I want to talk to you about something for just a minute that we talked about yesterday, and it has to do with Watergate. We got some emails, and some people were, I think, expressing the opinion that we were talking too much about Watergate and the pardon of Richard Nixon. First of all, we've talked about a lot of things, and we've talked a lot about the life of Gerald Ford. You cannot, being a responsible journalist, not talk about Watergate or the pardon of Richard Nixon. Yesterday, we had a conversation about a couple of things, and Susie, you talked about timing. You said if he might have waited a little bit longer.
That's what people were saying at the time, too.
It might have, you know, it might have eased the pain. And I cannot take credit for this research. Somebody actually handed this to me. It's from a book called Shadow. I don't know if I'll just hold it there. It's a Bob Woodward book. It's been out for quite some time, and it talks about the legacy of American presidents in association with Watergate. And in this book, it says this. President Ford is talking to Bob Woodward, and it says, this is a quote from the president, "It could have been better," Ford agreed, "but we were under a time pressure. In the initial meetings, Nixon and his lawyers had balked at acknowledging that he had committed crimes." Quoting the president again, "I wanted to get this thing done without a lot of leaks. They were worried about it becoming part of the public record and then getting pressure before it happened." Finally, when people would not take his answer, which was there was no quid pro quo, there was no deal, it was the right thing to do for the country, and all of those other reasons, President Ford, and you're seeing here pictures of the Watergate from the early 70s, and I lived there and drove by that building many times. I could never drive by there without thinking about these pictures. But here is what President Ford would pull out of his pocket, according to this book by Bob Woodward. It was a little dog-eared piece of paper that had written on it a decision of the Supreme Court in Burdick versus United States, and don't worry, none of us should know what that is. But it talks about giving a pardon, and it says the justices found that a pardon carries the implication of guilt, acceptance, and a confession of it. So Gerald Ford's position was that by giving Richard Nixon a pardon, and by him, there were very young Woodward and Bernstein, we were just up there, by his acceptance that he accepted guilt, and it was a confession of wrongdoing.
It's implied, yeah.
And so, I mean, that was the president's perspective on that. So
communication at that point, 30-some years ago, might have helped to carry that a long way,
well,
you know?
The country was so ravaged. The president himself told us in one of those interviews that the nation was split. There's a 1968, this is the 1968 campaign. That was just before Richard Nixon became president, and he had asked Gerald Ford to be his running mate. And Gerald Ford was, no thank you, I will become Speaker of the House.
But you know, you're talking about the pardon and the definition and the connotation of it. If you remember Spiro Agnew, who Gerald Ford replaced as vice president, he pled nolla contendere. And we're all as kids thinking, nolla contendere, what does that mean? It's the first time we understood it meant no contest, meaning I will not argue what you are accusing me of. I'm just not saying mea culpa, I'm guilty. It's just I won't contest it.
Yeah, we learned a lot about law in the 70s.
We sure did.